Hey, you're listening to the Brutally Delicious podcast. I'm Bruce.
And I'm Kris.
And today we're joined by producer extraordinaire Michael Beinhorn.
You're going to want to listen to this one.
You are definitely going to want to listen to this one. Lots of good topics covered in this. All right, so not taking anything away from Firepower, which I think was a great record. It's definitely not, Screaming for Vengeance or those kind of records. British Steel.
Yeah, it's not vintage, but I think it last year. It came out last year, right? I think.
Yeah, last year or the year before. I'm not 100% sure.
Yeah, I it's still on regular rotation. And there's a lot of classic metal songs on that. I think when we look back on Firepower, I mean, if you're going to go out on a high, I think that's the way to do it,
Oh yeah, and that dude's probably close to 70 now, and I mean, he sounds better than he's sounded in 30 years.
Let me see how old he is here.
I'm betting he's close to 70.
67.
Yeah, it was close.
God, if I'm that active when I'm 67, riding a Harley onto a stage and then running around in tight metal pants and screaming my face off, I'm gonna be a happy guy.
Right. I mean, look, my parents, whatever. All these people, it's all they can do to get to the kitchen or get down the hallway, and this guy's touring the world still making some of the most relevant records of his career. It's pretty crazy.
Oh yeah, and their guitar player, I can't remember his name. What was his name? The guy that has Parkinson's. I can't believe it's
Glenn Tipton.
Oh yeah, I couldn't believe Tipton. He's had Parkinson's for years, and just never. He was like, whatever. I'm going to play guitar.
Yeah.
It's and then finally he's like, okay, I can't do this.
Right, because he's up there in the 70s or close to 70 as well.
Yeah, and then he's like, well, I could probably still do a few shows. I'll just fly out to those.
I would love to be in the audience when he makes his, surprise appearances. That'd be pretty killer.
Well, I don't know if he'll do that anymore on this tour, but he did. The first time they came through DC here, he did play on stage here. He popped out for a quick little round,
and I imagine the crowd went absolutely nuts.
Oh, it was crazy. I think they did Living After Midnight, and it was just over the top.
Nice.
Yeah. And then Maiden's coming too. I can't wait for that show.
That's another band, though. I mean, they're not quite, I don't think, pre-stage, but they're getting up there. They're still original members putting on an amazing show.
Oh, it's unbelievable. There was this meme going around for a while. It was like Mariah Carey, New Year's Eve, Times Square. And I couldn't hear myself. I couldn't sing, blah, blah, blah. And then there's a picture of Bruce Dickinson. Underneath, he's like, I fought tongue cancer. I beat it. I then got in a jet, flew my band to Rio, and I rocked my ass off. What's your problem?
Yep. That guy's got a million accomplishments between, the flying the major jets, and I think he's a professional fencer as well as a heavy metal singer and an author and whatever the hell else he does. It's pretty wild.
Oh, it's insane, and I was speaking with Wolfgang, who manages their press stuff, and I said to him, I said, does he really fly the plane? He's like, oh yeah, he really flies the plane.
That's crazy.
I was like, it's not just a promo stunt? No, he loves flying the plane. I was like, that's insane.
That's pretty amazing accomplishments.
Yeah.
And still relevant. I mean, still putting out good records and putting on great shows. We saw them last year, like I said. He gets around like nobody's business.
Oh yeah, I think he's classically trained too as a vocalist. He seems like the academic guy to me.
Oh yeah, I would say so.
I'll never forget the first time I heard Aces High. I was like, I think I was about, what year was that record? 86.
Yeah, that's probably about right. 86, 87?
86, 87, and my older brother had bought it, and he right around Christmas, and we were at my grandma's place, and my parents had bought me this ghetto blaster. And I hit play, and I heard Aces High for the first time. And I was just like, what is this music? It is so good. You know, my mom's like, don't listen to that. That's the devil's music.
Yeah. The devil's music. So I don't know, what you know about me, but growing up, I grew up in the church kind of setting, and man, they used to have those people come in and try and play records backwards. It was that whole satanic panic of the late '80s, and they'd be playing records backwards, and oh wait, he just said, Beelzebub is my whatever, and nonsense crap. They used to have like record burning parties. You could bring your CDs and your records, and they'd burn them in a bonfire to free you from Satan and all kinds of bullshit. As you can see, it worked, because here I am, 40 years later doing this crap. So
buying records,
right, and not playing them backwards at all. And imagine if they heard Ghost or anything like that now, they'd be all freaked out. Oh
my God, yeah. Back then, they're worried about Twisted Sister.
Right.
D. Schneider's testifying before Congress.
Yep.
Yeah, we're not going to take it. What a bad song! Oh, my God!
Yeah, and I think if you play it backwards, it says, Satan, come have chicken nuggets with me or something.
Totally planned.
Right.
Yeah. What I've learned to do is speak forwards so that it ends up being something else backwards. Satan taught me.
Right. Even the riffs, you can play the riffs if you play them a certain way. They they speak to you backwards.
Oh man, people can get right out of control.
But whatever.
Yeah, it is what it is.
What else have you been listening to this week?
A lot of my own music. I've been writing a lot of songs lately, and that's really all I've been doing. I haven't really been listening to a lot of other music other than that. I've been referencing a lot of tracks. Like the new Death Angel is still high on the rotation.
Right.
That's a great track. But yeah, what about you? What have you been listening to?
Still stuck on the Amon Amarth. That's got me this week.
Yeah. I started a Pandora radio station, a Judas Priest Pandora radio station. So in the car, I listen to whatever Pandora decides I'm going to listen to.
Right.
From the Priest kind of area. So there's a lot of old classic Maiden in there. Priest, Accept.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So it's kind of cool to go back and hear the roots of metal. When I grew up, people called that metal. But I don't know. I kind of see it more as hard rock. Like when I think of metal now, I think of much heavier bands than those.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Yeah, I think of like the growling Amon Amarth, Death Angel kind of stuff, not Priest.
Yeah, Lamb of God. I'd consider in that category.
And in like 20 years, that Twisted Sister stuff's going to be like elevator music, easy listening.
My wife always listens to this radio station up here. I can't remember the name of it, but it's like an 80s hit station, and they play like Phil Collins and like, Cyndi Lauper, and they play Twisted Sister and Bon Jovi and all these bands that were like heavier,
Right, and now they're easy listening or whatever you want to call them.
Like, oh, I remember that song. That was fun.
Yep.
Hello?
Hey, Michael, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Michael, how are you doing?
I'm well, thanks. How are you?
Great, thanks.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah, we don't have too many questions. We're just going to kind of have a conversation and see what's going on, all right?
That sounds good to me.
What are you working on these days?
I am in the midst of doing pre-production with a bunch of different artists.
Anything you're allowed to share with us, or is that
I've done some work with Rivers Cuomo from Weezer. A lot of the other artists I'm working with aren't quite on that tier.
So I was going through your bio, and I was just shocked at some of the stuff that you worked on. And one of the things I wanted to talk to you about is maybe you get asked this a lot, maybe you don't. But when you did the Mother's Milk record, you were working with a Vancouver engineer at the time, or he is now Vancouver-based, Garth Richardson. I'm originally from Vancouver, and I worked with Garth for a few months. What was your experience like working on that record with Garth? He's such an accomplished guy now. But at the time, I assume he was just kind of getting his feet wetted with it.
Well, Garth didn't really he wasn't on the record for that long. We tracked drums and bass with him, and then I think he was with us for a few weeks when we started tracking guitars, and he left the project after that. I don't have too much of a recollection of what the experience was like, to tell you the truth.
Oh, that's cool. I totally understand.
Yeah, it was. I mean, it's quite a while ago.
Yeah, no, it is a while ago. It's just funny because you guys are both so accomplished in what you do now.
Right.
And at the time, you were not just getting started, but you were kind of on the rise, so to speak. So I was just wondering, how that felt and what it was like, kind of going through that process.
Yeah. I don't recall really working with him so much. I mean, the process of working with the band, that was definitely a different story. That's kind of where my head was at, really. Yeah,
of course. Yeah. And did you have any challenges working on that record, per se?
Oh, yeah. It was... I did 2 records with the Chili Peppers, and each one of them presented their own unique sets of challenges. It was, and both records were totally different. The one before Uplift Mofo Party Plan had been really about trying to help establish them more, because they weren't really they were complete unknowns actually outside of Los Angeles at that point, with like a couple of very rare exceptions. And once we established them more, Mother's Milk was really about trying to create like a firm identity and even maybe get them a bit more notice, because all of a sudden their record label was very interested in them, which was a dramatic sort of turnaround from where they were before. The record company absolutely I would say they despised them. It was kind of comical to see them do a complete reversal like that. But there were issues within the band, like the band members were kind of Flea and Anthony were kind of they had sort of a feud going on while we were making the record, so it was kind of hard to get both sides to really come to the table at any point. So I kind of found myself sort of out there on my own a lot of the time trying to make the record.
Oh yeah.
So it was, that was tough. Pre-production took a long time. Before we initially started the record, a long time before we actually did commence work, and the day that we were supposed to begin pre-production, one of the members of the band died, Hillel Slovak. So that kind of put a wow. that was definitely put a crimp in things. And they went through a series of drummers and guitarists and things like that, and it was definitely an epic kind of slog to get to the finish line on that one. It was hard. It was really, really hard to do,
So, go ahead, Kris.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, go ahead, Bruce. It's okay.
So you've got quite a resume and a bunch of bands that you've worked with. Do you actively seek out bands that you want to work with nowadays, or are people coming to you, as I'm sure they do? How does that work out? How do you pick the projects you choose?
I think I've only gone after like a couple of projects in my life. I generally don't tend to do it like that. I mean, for one thing, I find that if I'm familiar with a band, that's sort of it doesn't work in my favor in terms of trying to produce them, because the less familiarity I have with an artist, the better job I can do with them. So I try to know as little as possible about artists that I'm working with beforehand. It makes my ability to be objective easier, better, and I think that works in everyone's favor.
Gotcha. Okay.
Nice. I see also in your bio here that you're recording on 2-inch tape, but with an 8-track head stack.
Yeah.
What is that? Like, I know about 2-inch 16-track. So were you just trying to increase the dynamic range of the tape, or what was the purpose of going with that?
I was trying to increase everything. You know, I mean, it kind of goes along with the principle more is better, I guess. Like, I don't know. Like, I mean, everyone who ever listened to playback on a tape machine would have noticed that there was a drastic difference in certain tonal elements in terms of transient response, even signal to noise ratio on, you know, going from 24 to 16. So logically, I just kind of reasoned that, well, if you can stay in the same format from 24 to 16, why not go, you know, from 16 to 8? You'd probably get like an exponential increase again from 16 to 8, which is, you know, I had someone build these head stacks because the format didn't exist until then. Yeah. And it was funny because the first time I got to try it was working on an Ozzy Osbourne record, and I actually had to have this machine that I had retrofitted with these head stacks flown to Paris, because you could do things like that back then. People actually had recording budgets. And, you know, I had no idea whether it was going to work or not. And I just remember, like, you know, the moment of truth coming and recording a drum pass and playing it back and going like, oh, my God, it worked. It was definitely one of the most exciting moments in my life up till that point.
Oh, I bet. I mean, I recorded the tape a lot, and what you hear from input is not what you hear from return. You know?
No.
It's so different.
Yeah, it is. And obviously you're dealing with a lot of other issues when you've changed the head size, or I should say the track width. You have to be more careful with aligning the tape machine and getting the azimuths right and stuff like that. But and also trying to link it up via time code to other tape machines. You know, someone had to build a special device to be able to do that. Like, I didn't want to use any of the audio tracks as a time code storage because, you know, if you think about the amount of money that one just spends on a tape machine and a head stack, you know, one track on that machine is probably worth about like $3,000 or $4,000 or something like that. You know, in relative terms, and it's like I can't see just letting that be a, you know, track for a noise that goes.
So, how did you do that then?
Well, the genius who built the head stacks was a guy named John French, who's sadly deceased, but he figured out that we could make that the time code didn't actually need the same kind of width.
Yeah.
Or for the code. So what he did was he had this machine that would print code on a track that was positioned between tracks 4 and 5. It was a very thin track, and it was surrounded by metal guard bands. I can't remember how he did it exactly, but it ensured that there'd be no audio bleed from the center track to 4 and 5, because a lot of times what would happen is I would use the tape machine exclusively for drums, and the transient information from the drums on other tape machines, if it was printed hot enough, it would actually bleed. It would actually move into the timecode track and cause the timecode to lose lock with other machines.
Yeah.
So the guard bands actually served like multiple purposes. It ensured that the timecode wouldn't be jarred by any kind of transient information from anyone else. So, I mean, the machine stayed locked better than most machines.
Wow.
That, you know, where you had time code on 16 or 24 or something like that. It was incredible.
Oh, great. Man. My mind is just blown right now.
That's some pretty high-tech stuff right there.
Well, not for these days, it ain't.
No.
But are you still recording to tape?
No, I'm not. You know, I found that most people actually don't have the, I guess they don't have the musical the performance aptitude to really be able to get it. Like, you really, to be able to do that, for that to make sense, it's important to be working with musicians where you can really capture an incredible performance. And sadly, a lot of people don't really play that way anymore. It's more about being able to get like a million different passes, on a song, and being able to edit parts together. And it's become kind of almost a waste.
Yeah.
Kind of sad, but that's how it goes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I remember the first time I got Pro Tools, I was just like, what is this magic? The vocal actually sounds like the same on input as it does on output. What's happening?
Yeah, it's a crazy thing.
Yeah. Bruce?
Okay, so I'm looking at your discography and resume here. Is there a particular session, and this might be difficult because you've done so many, but is there a particular session that stands out as being like one of the most difficult to get done or get to press?
Well, I think a lot of them have had like their own, they're all, a lot of the best ones really were very, very hard to do. They all had like a certain element. I mean, the first Chili Peppers record is definitely a standout in that department. Because I was dealing with two band members who were full-on junkies.
Right.
And also dealing with a record company that really didn't want to make a record with the artist, that would have been happier in many respects just to drop them, but I think they retained the band because they wanted to torture them. More than any, I don't know. People made enough jokes about it, where I was like, wow, I don't understand why they're not dropping these guys. It was a record that I think at any other time in history probably wouldn't have gotten made. And the fact that we made it at all indicates that there may be forces in the universe that are beyond what we can perceive. But it was, it definitely took a lot out of many people. I remember at one point I was driving in a car with the manager, and we were at an intersection someplace, and he was just waiting, and he took his hands off the wheel of the car, and he put them on his head, and he just kind of hunched over, and he just started mumbling, I don't know what to do. I just don't know what to
do. Nice.
Yeah. So that is definitely one that sort of takes the cake.
All right, so flipping the script there, do you have one that was like super idyllic that just went better than you ever thought it could be?
Just in terms of expediency and everything just kind of clicking?
Yeah, let's go with that.
No. No, they were, a lot of them were super hard. If it wasn't, if everything went okay and, there were no technical issues on the recording, there'd be things happening with personalities.
Right.
Some of the people on the project were, there'd be a lot of psychology involved and individual neurosis that had to get worked with. So I can't think of one record that was like a real standout in that way.
Yeah. I heard a quote once that after a producer has produced for 20 years, they should be given an honorary degree in psychology.
Maybe some of us. I don't know that there's like a systematic approach that can be applied and reapplied, just because each person you meet is completely different. I think it's really more hopefully about having good empathy skills and being able to understand the people that trying to understand the people that you're working with.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, you've got to wear a lot of hats sitting behind that console, not just the producer to add more cowbell. You've got to wear all kinds of hats, correct? Right?
Yeah, and then there's a guy who does say, more cowbell. It's funny though, because like there are people who, I think that this definitely comes into play when you've had enough success, that you can walk into a room and command respect from people, and also where they will kind of, almost to some extent, they'll kind of correct themselves. It's really funny how that works. There's some people who are able to command that very, very well. It also helps if they're working with artists who are very capable. But there are some people who are able to wield that kind of mystique very well and use it to their advantage.
Right. Yeah, and I guess that comes in handy then, because it's just down to business and making the best record you can make.
If you can get to that place, I mean, there'll always be one guy who looks at the other guy and says, this is Bruce Dickinson telling us what to do, so shouldn't we just go ahead and add more cowbell?
Nice. So I've got to ask, because Kris and I were talking a little bit about this before we got you on. What was it like working on the Manson albums?
It was, I guess to some extent, if you can imagine it, it probably happened. It was. I mean, he was actually very professional when he had to work, when he actually had to do his end of things. I mean, there were definitely a lot of hijinks going on. It was actually a record that I did. It was one of the quickest records I've ever worked on. Going from soup to nuts, I think it took us about like 2.5 months to do it.
Oh wow!
Yeah, 3 months maybe with pre-production. Definitely, he's definitely a unique individual, that's for sure. But like I said, when the red light came on, when it was time for him to do his thing, he was really, he worked very hard. So I have to give him that.
Okay. So I've got one more, and then we'll see what Kris has. But nowadays, I mean, we're talking about how technology has changed so much. Do you find that pre-production, I guess you're doing it mostly digitally and emailing files, is that taking away from like what everybody used to get in the room and used to bang things out off each other?
Well, for one thing, people don't really do pre-production anymore. And a lot of times the getting in the room and banging things out together, I mean, that's kind of part of pre-production. I mean, having that be sort of like the exclusive way a person makes a record is not, I think it could be applicable when you're talking about a band like the Rolling Stones, but most artists, especially now, can't really write songs that are up to that caliber. So they need sort of like an extra layer, and this has actually been my experience for a very long time, for several decades, that, starting with the Chili Peppers, that artists need another layer of scrutiny, and without that, you kind of wind up with a record of really mediocre music. If you don't have people who are overseeing the process, going like, okay, this song needs this, that song needs that. You're missing a song that will fulfill this function. We need to round the record out. Having that kind of overview. I mean, records like Superunknown wouldn't exist the way they exist without that kind of pre-production. So and it's sad because now people are not really doing it anymore. Like they're actually like an artist will write 10, 12 songs, and they'll be like, okay, I'm ready to record, and they'll go into the studio. The person they're working with may suggest a couple of alterations while they're in the process of setting up to record, or even while they're recording. That part sounds like it could be changed, et cetera, but there isn't really any kind of like deep granular observation going on. And I think that really hurts artists. I'd say pretty much without exception. I mean, I'm trying to say with certain exceptions, but I can't, because I haven't heard anyone in a long time who's actually made a record that has the kind of like power
Right.
The kind of emotional power, and I'm not talking about volume, or how loud you can get your guitar to go, or how hard you can hit your drums. It's just the kind of emotional communicative power that music is supposed to evince and provide an audience with.
What do you think is causing that? Is that a result of technology and the disconnect? Everybody's doing stuff from distance? Or what do you think causes that?
Well, actually, the issue is mainly economic. The issue really stems from the fact that people aren't making as much money from record sales anymore, and as a result, record companies aren't spending a lot of money, especially on bands, on artists that involve writing songs prior to going into a recording studio, and will cut them as a band, as opposed to songs that are composed by legions of writers that get together, who don't necessarily make better music by doing so. In fact, their music tends to be more emotionally kind of like distant and detached, because you've got like 15 people in a room together who have no kind of basis on which to share a common narrative or communicate a common mood or emotion or something like that. So what they're creating is something that while it may be structurally incredibly well put together, it's not going to have the same kind of emotional power that a great song is going to have, or a great performance. And not to mention the fact that the person performing it is not really invested in the music. Like, chances are, I'd say 8, 9 times out of 10, the person singing is not one of the people who co-wrote the song,
Right.
But in terms of artists that do, a lot of people don't have large recording budgets to work with. So if you're a producer, let's say, back, I don't know, 15, 20 years ago, you would have set aside like 2-3 months of time to do pre-production with an artist. But what does that do if you're not getting paid a lot of money?
Right.
If you're looking at an artist who can only pay you like 20, 30, 40,000 bucks to produce your record, if you're devoting 3-4 months of your time to their project, that means that you're making a fraction of what you made before, and your standard of living has actually gotten harder because of inflation. So when you look at a recording project now, you're going to figure out, okay, I want to get that 20 or 30 grand, but how do I amortize it? So in terms of like the time allotment, how do I do this so it makes sense? You figure that you cut the most time-consumptive parts out of the process, and the most time-consumptive process of all, outside of actually physically recording, would be pre-production.
Right.
So, you just figure out, all right, they want my name on this record. They don't care what I do. So I'm just going to go in, cut the record with them, get as much of the budget as I can, and, call it a day. Which is great if you're a producer. I would say in a lot of respects, you're actually making more money now than you were like 15 years ago in that sense, because you could be making 20, 30 grand every like 2-3 weeks. It's not a bad payday.
No.
You know, but it's not making better records because you're not spending the time that really is necessary to make a record on constructing it, you know. So that's where the drawback is.
I couldn't agree more. And I also think, too, tell me how you feel about this, but you can't do pre-production because your pay goes down, but also the band isn't getting the advance that they would get, so they can't afford to take the time off to do it either, really.
Well, they would. They would if it was being presented to them in a way where they could do it. See, the way I'm doing it right now is I'm making sure that I'm doing pre-production as something that can be adjunct to a recording. They can actually be done. That doesn't need to be done in a tight schedule, let's say. Yeah. Where the producer does pre-production, then he goes into the recording. I mean, if you're in that position, of course, as a producer, you're definitely cutting into your income. There's no question about it. But let's say you're working with an artist, and the artist is aware that he doesn't have to rush into a recording studio right after he's done with his pre-production. What's he going to do? He's going to take his time. If he's got a job, he's going to work. And he's going to do the pre-production when he's able to do it, when he's able to really spend the time on it. It makes the whole process easier. It's going to take a little longer, but at the end of it, he's still going to wind up with the same, if not better, results. He's got a record that's essentially as close to a turnkey operation as you can get, and he can go straight into a recording studio and cut it.
Gotcha.
Nice. Are you finding that you're a lot of the, like, like a lot of the stuff you produce. So maybe you're in the studio and you're saying like, okay, we got to get through this record. And as you're making changes, those become the final kind of take. So almost like the demo is the new recording.
Once a demo that's been cut at the end of pre-production, or
no. So like, let's say that like, because you were just talking about it, and you're saying, okay, I have to do this in 3 weeks, and we don't have the time to kind of go and do 2 or 3 months of pre-production. So as you go through that process, are you finding that you're kind of doing both at the same time?
No, I will not and do not make records that way. You know, I don't go into I'm not the guy who's going to take like 20 or 30 grand and cut a record in 2 weeks. My brain, for one thing, my brain doesn't work that way. Like I can't actually sit down in a recording studio and knock something out that fast. You know, cool. I think there are people who are incredibly skilled at that sort of thing, and they figured out how to formalize it, and that's great. You know, I can't do it. I'm just not capable of it, and I've had to accept it. You know, it doesn't make it any easier for me in terms of working, but it means that I basically devote myself to the things that I'm best at. I'm better at helping people organize their records. I'm better at working on projects that have very, long, that are sort of long in terms of schedule and don't have much in terms of limitations. I mean, there aren't that many projects out there like that. You know, so I'm really devoting myself almost exclusively at this point to doing pre-production, partly because I think it's necessary. I think it's something that people need, vitally. If they don't get it, well, I think the result is kind of speaking for itself right now, like the quality of the recordings that people are making.
I couldn't agree more with you. It's amazing. Yeah,
so I don't. I don't like to. I think rushing is not good for most people. You know, I know that there's been a lot said about the fact that we don't have a lot of money to work with means that people have to work faster, which is good for them. And it's like, it might be good for some people. It's not good for everybody. You know, let's keep in mind also that not every artist is Muddy Waters, who could write a song, walk into a room and record it, and it would become iconic. You know? It's a whole different level of artistry, and we don't see people like that anymore. So to be able to compare that to now is absolutely absurd. It's completely unrealistic and delusional. You know, the artists today need more help than they've ever needed, I would say, in recording history. You know, and most artists are really aware of the fact that they have an endless amount of tracks to work with, and they'll just keep noodling and noodling and noodling without coming up with anything that's substantial or useful. You know, they need to be directed. They need to understand discipline. They need to understand what they're actually in there doing, like what their expression is about, instead of the function of making a record, which is essentially a waste of time because, how many other people are there in the world who are doing this right now? You know, who have a Pro Tools rig, or a GarageBand on their computer and oh, I've got that. I can make a record. It's like, no, you think you can, but you really can't.
Right.
Absolutely.
Well, that's all I've got, Michael. I don't know if you got anything else, Kris.
No, I just, I'm just a huge fan, and I appreciate you taking the time with us today.
Absolutely.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Huge fan as well here. We talk about all those Manson records, but even the Ozzy records, Osmosis is one of my favorites still to this day.
For me, it's Superunknown. I mean, that record changed my life.
Oh, awesome.
What was your role on Superunknown?
Well, producer. Well, I think, as I indicated earlier, that without pre-production, that record would not be what it is. I would say that without my involvement on that record, a lot of the songs that are on that record, I'd say most of the best ones wouldn't even exist. That's a very big statement to make, but they gave me a demo tape to listen to when I started working with them, and it contained a third of the record. The rest of it was a waste, and I had to tell them that we weren't ready to record, and it took 2 months to go from that point to the point where I was like, okay, we got what we need, which is amazing that it took that little time to get there. But really, I'd say about 80% of the best songs on that record were written in that 2-month period.
Wow.
And if they hadn't, chances are they could have gone in with someone else who would have been like, oh, that's great, we got a record, because Spoon Man, for example, was on the tape that they gave me, and that was their first single. And a lot of people, I think, would have been satisfied with that. But I was like, this is nowhere near what we need. And if they'd gone in with just the music on that, it would have been a total letdown. Black Hole Sun wouldn't exist. Fell on Black Days wouldn't exist.
Oh man.
Superunknown, the song wouldn't exist.
Wow.
Et cetera, et cetera. So that was my involvement on the record. I really kind of I feel that I encouraged, spurred them on, hopefully inspired them a little bit to come up with that material.
Oh man, that record. I was in high school when that record came out, and I mean, I can't imagine the pressure that must have been on the band and on you after Bad Motorfinger came out. And I mean, that record was pretty epic.
Not really.
No,
it was funny. I think a lot of people back then, when a band was successful, and they were big enough, you could tell who was going to be the next big band, and everyone was looking at Soundgarden after the success of Bad Motorfinger going like, their next record is going to be huge. You could just tell. Yeah. But I think people, for some reason, had this impression, even in the industry, that stuff like that just happened. That it was one of those things where where the band would just come out with a great record because it was their time. And it was never like that. It was like, yeah, you can tell that this band's going to get even bigger, but like how it gets there is a whole different, different question. And when I wound up working with them, that was my mission statement. No one told me you're going to have to do this. I just took it on myself because I knew people were saying this band's going to be huge, and I was like, yes, I agree. This band's going to be huge. I have to do my job now and make sure this happens. So I really kind of, and it wasn't pressure. It was kind of like, it was almost kind of like a fun, like, problem with a solution that was out there for me to find. And it wasn't really a conversation I ever had with the artist. Yeah. It was one of these things where I was like, all right, this is my job. I have to solve this, So the band, I think that they had this idea initially that they were going to go into the studio and cut a record in like 2 or 3 weeks and leave, because that's how they wanted to do it. Yeah. They're like, all right, we're big. We know it. We tour with Guns N' Roses. We can do whatever we want. So they had this like crazy idea that it was going to be like peaches and cream. And my feeling was like, oh no, this is, I think that's why they hired me too, because they had this impression that I was going to be some like little punk rock guy who was going to make this like, who was going to make a quick ass, like, whatever, record that would be like low impact. And I was like, oh no, this is not. I never had the conversation with them, but my attitude was like, no, this is definitely a long haul type project. It's like there's a lot at stake here. There's a lot riding on this, so it's got to be as good as it can possibly be. Every sound on that record was like meticulously kind of crafted.
Yeah, nice. It shows. That record was a game changer for me personally.
Good, I'm glad.
When I heard it, from the sonic quality of it to the songwriting, I think, did Brendan mix that record, Brendan O'Brien? Or did you mix the record?
No, he mixed it.
Yeah, everything on that record is just, to me, it's kind of like a pinnacle of recording on that album. So
yeah, well, it was meant to be. Yeah. It was designed. It was built that way by design. Like, there was a lot of that going into it. And I actually, there was a lot of friction when we made it, because the artist, the band didn't want that. Like, they didn't want that kind of record, and it wasn't like, oh, I got my way or anything like that. It was more like, they complained. They weren't happy about how it was going. They felt that we were wasting time, but every time they came into the studio and heard what it sounded like, they didn't stop talking. Didn't say anything anymore, because they were listening to it, and they realized, I don't think they realized what the record was going to do. I mean, it was really funny because the product manager from A&M came down at one point and listened to the first 4 songs we'd cut. And he got up at the end of the listening session. And he was like, "Thanks a lot, guys." And he walked out. And I was like, "What was that?" "Thanks a lot?" I was like, "You know what you're just listening to?" And when the record was finished, I remember he reached out to me and he was like, I apologize. I was so wrong. I was so wrong.
Nice.
Yeah, it was funny. But he was humble about it. Like I had to appreciate his position. But it was one of those things I don't think anyone really understood while we were making it. Even the band to some extent, but when it was done, everyone was just like, "Oh shit."
Right.
Yeah, this is a heavy record.
Yeah.
It's amazing.
Well, awesome, Michael. I appreciate your time.
No problem, guys. My pleasure.
Look forward to more records from you.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
All right, be well. Got anything else, Kris?
No, thanks again. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure, gentlemen.
Be well, sir. All right.
You too. Have a good one.
You too.
See ya.
Bye.
Bye.
Shit, that was a great interview.
Holy shit.
Wow. So I feel like we just talked to royalty, which is kind of funny, but...
Well, I always thought Brendan O'Brien had produced Superunknown. I didn't know that he was the producer. So he's like, "I produced it." I was like, I better look this up. Because the record that I had owned, like the CD I bought, must have been a misprint. It said produced by Brendan O'Brien.
Yeah, what a nice guy, too.
Oh, yeah.
And he's got stories, I'm sure, for a billion years to come.
Oh, yeah, like when he's talking about the two junkies.
Yeah, I know there was a way he was kind of like straddling the line not to tell anything really bad about him, but I'm sure he's seen some crazy shit.
Oh, God. I mean, he's worked with a lot of heroin addicts.
Yeah, a lot. But some of my favorite records are in there. Maybe not Superunknown. I like it for what it is, but some of the other stuff, like the Black Label Society and the Ozzy stuff, I'm like, holy crap. And I know, like, when I'm looking at records, I'm still one of those nerdy geeks. I look it up and go, produced by Michael Beinhorn. Shit, that's going to be a good record. I'm going to grab it.
I'm surprised you didn't ask him about those records.
I asked him about Osmosis. We were talking about it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I love that record. So, yeah, that was great. I enjoyed that conversation a lot.
Yeah, no, it blew my mind away. Like, I was like, should I ask him about this 2-inch tape thing? And I was like, well, I want to know about it. So
yeah.
I'm going to ask him.
It was also one of those ones that started off kind of weird. It was kind of awkward in the beginning, right?
Yeah.
Did you feel that? I was like, I don't know how to get started here. But then once he started, he can talk.
Oh, yeah. You're like, thanks for joining us. He's like, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know what to.
This is going nowhere.
Because I'm going to tell you a quick story before I have to before we wrap this up. But I guess I'm not going to say the name of the band. But I did an interview years back with a really big Florida, Tampa-based death metal band. Really, really big.
Yeah.
And I got the singer on the phone, and I had prepped. It was one of my early interviews. I'd never done something that big before, and I was like, shit, this is gonna be ready. I got everything. Dude, I had 30 questions. Every question was, yeah, no, I don't think so. One word fucking answers. And I didn't even know what to do. I was done in like 30 seconds with all of my questions, and it was all this weird, awkward silence. And I'm like, I don't even know what I'm going to do. I can't do anything with this interview. There was nothing. My editor was like, hey, where's the interview? I go, well, here it is. I'm going to transcribe it for you. And my question is like 3 lines, and then no. I didn't even know what to do with that.
Oh, that's crazy.
Yeah, so I appreciate it. That's what I thought this one was starting off, and I'm like, oh man, this is not going to start off well, and then it went really well. I mean, that was one of the better ones we've done, I think. Super great.
It was amazing.